All right. We are almost live. This fun
Almost.
this fun place we exist in. So I'm doing this
It's
podcast
like
in
13
our
seconds.
I feel like it's longer than 13 seconds that we do this for.
17, 18, 19. Okay, now I got go live.
Awesome, me too.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey.
Welcome back to the best podcast out there. I love how
It
I'm
really is.
butchering the word podcast already. And I was about to say, what was it? What did we say before? It was like semi-coherent, somewhat chaotic. How did we describe
Yeah.
ourselves last season?
Yeah. Well, we also have the almost in sync too.
Yes. We're very close.
We're, yeah. Yeah.
We're like the best B minus podcast out there currently.
For teachers.
Definitely. That's what you should have called us, the B minus. Maybe C plus
Oh,
some days.
we're a B plus in my heart. Like an A
I
minus.
love it. A minus. One time I had this professor in college where we all got our papers from her back at the end of the term, and she wrote
Uh-huh.
on our papers like it was an A, but a low A. And we were all like, "What? Okay,
What?
thank you for adding that, but I'll take
Yeah.
it.
Thanks for the
I'll take my
A.
low A." Exactly.
Right. What's
So,
that even
anyways,
mean?
right, exactly. But welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I'm Ashlyn.
I'm Brittany,
And we are
and
the
this is the Ignited
Ignited Podcast.
podcast.
That one was not as almost in sync as we usually are, but we
I thought it
have
was great.
it was, I love you, Brittany. I love your positivity with everything. So today we are talking all about chapter 3, right? Chapter 3, we're on? Yeah,
Yeah,
chapter 3. You are not
yeah.
the boss of me. And we got some good stuff coming your way. So,
Mm-hmm.
Brittany, why don't you do us the honors of starting us off with our first summary?
All right.
Okay.
Oh, so if you are just catching us live too, or this is your first time listening to season 2 of the Ignited podcast, we're reading Make Me Understanding and Engaging Student Resistance by Eric Toshalis. And this is chapter 3, You're Not the Boss of Me, Resistance Theory. Do you like that?
Awesome. I love
Yeah,
that.
that
Love
was
the
my radio
context.
voice.
That
Yeah.
was beautiful. Now do your radio voice for the entire summary with
Oh
a
my
time
gosh.
crunch. Pressure
I
on.
just made a fart noise on, on our
Yes, you just
podcast.
did that on air. We're not removing that.
On air. No.
That's staying in. All right.
Okay.
You ready?
Give me the timer. Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Summarize.
Okay, so in chapter 3, Mr. Toshalis introduces us to resistance theory. So in the previous chapter, we talked about social reproduction theory, which is the idea that schools reproduce social inequity and solidify social stratification. And in this chapter, we talk about how social reproduction theory is relevant. However, it's not a closed loop. It's not like a definitive journey for these students who are experiencing this social inequity and social stratification, that they can bring themselves out of their circumstances. And they do that through resisting. And resistance, although it can be frustrating, it is absolutely developmentally appropriate, and it is absolutely and totally necessary for some schools that are so inequitable and force students to comply and deviate away from what their cultural norms are. And so when we embrace resistance in the classroom and engage it in positive ways, we can teach students better ways to break away from the the place that they find themselves in, that it keeps them stuck in their social sphere and their situation. And he gives us suggestions on how to engage and negotiate student resistance through engaging and negotiating power, doing collaborative definitions of class norms, and I'm out of time.
You have 0, but beautiful detail. I love it.
Thank you. All right,
You
let
are
me get mine.
welcome. Okay, let's do this.
Okay.
I
Timer,
have
timer,
my cat
timer.
on my lap too, and she's just attacking me.
Muffin,
I know, Muffin, please stop.
ready?
Let's do this.
All right. Boop.
All right. So in chapter 3 of Make Me by Eric Deschalis, it talks about resistance theory and about how that phrase we hear all the time from our students, "You're not the boss of me," or things like that. It's actually quite normal and healthy, and how it's also necessary in many cases. And the way that we unpack this is through examining resistance theory. And this, kind of in a nutshell, is where kids use resistance to pull them out of their circumstances. And in this chapter, we end up diving into why this happens, why it works. And we also end up looking at some differences in how we view behavior and how we view students. So, like, our end goal is to know and to empower our students. But what ends up happening is when we are viewing kids as deviant, we also end up viewing them as defiant. And these kids that are the defiant kids, in air quotes, we end up butting heads with. And it ends up creating these exacerbated problems that just keep lasting in school. And then teachers end up struggling as well, trying to manage their classrooms. And they struggle with things like defining and understanding respect, for example, and how with different cultures and different students, different teachers, it is something so objective, and how when we just enforce our own cultural norms on things, it ends up creating a bit of a dumpster fire. So we also talk about the hidden curriculum. I'm getting off on a tangent right now. We end up talking about the hidden curriculum as well. And we end up talking about how the structure in of itself of school is built inequitably, and how we need to understand kids, cooperate with them, build a relationship. I'm going to stop right there.
All right. That's good.
Thank you. I definitely got a little carried away there for a second.
So, in reading this chapter, I think something that really resonated with me was the power negotiation, because uh, in my last few years of teaching, I was really on one about student autonomy. I was experimenting in my classroom and I wanted to go all in with a fully autonomous class.
I love it.
And that, yeah, it was fantastic, and I learned so much, and the students, they flourished in ways that uh eh, not that I wasn't expecting, because I definitely was expecting it. But they they surprised me with how self-directed their learning became, and how comfortable and how easy they they negotiated the power amongst themselves. And that was so powerful, and it's what made me stick to my guns on giving kids autonomy in the classroom, even though I was fighting a constant battle with admin and other teachers, just the system, right? Because whether we agree with it or not, or whether we like it, school is heavily, heavily reliant on compliance.
Mm-hmm.
So when he dove in to the different definitions of power, um, he described two definitions, uh, Arendt's and Weber's. So Max Weber defines power as the ability to carry out one's will despite resistance. Okay. So the ability to carry out one's will, even though you're being resisted. And then I think her name's Helen Arendt. She's a very popular author. She was a victim of the Holocaust. She is a philosopher and I think a sociologist, but she defined power as um, uh, like an undiscovered potential that exists when a group fully organizes. Like that's power.
Ooh, that's like
Um,
goosebumps worthy right there.
yeah. And so when I read Max Weber's definition, which is the ability to carry out one's will despite resistance, that made me think like nobody has power in the classroom, which is something that I've said for a long time. Like you cannot control your students.
Yeah, that was one of the
Control is an
quotes
illusion.
too. I actually highlighted. Let me see if I can find that
Mhm,
one now and bring it back to the text. Okay. So it says, it is the students who have the ultimate control over the relative success of teachers' efforts. Anything
mhm,
accomplished in the classroom is radically dependent on student cooperation. No matter what the teacher does, if the student says no, it will not happen. And there's so much
yep,
truth to that. So like the
yep,
more we keep like fighting this power struggle battle, like,
mhm.
it's on the kids, like, we have to
Let it
do
go.
what they let us do.
Right, right. And I think one of the biggest issues with schooling is that we designed a system that can't work with hierarchy and
Yeah,
forced it to rely on hierarchy. Like, and it
that's true.
can't, right? Um, which, like, and I wanted to bring this up because I thought I had this like epiphany today. In the different teacher evaluation frameworks,
Uh-huh.
the rubrics, right?
Yeah.
There's always a not a characteristic, but a section that relies on independent learning,
Mhm.
student directed learning, and that is typically underneath highly qualified. So if your students are self-guided in their learning, you're going to get a highly qualified sticker.
But see,
Good
this is
job.
where I I may be interrupting your thought midway,
No,
but I also
no.
feel like schools put themselves in such a paradox because, like,
Yes.
we want to
Yes.
have this, but then we
Uh-huh.
also wanna tell you exactly how to stand in line and catch a bubble while you're walking.
Right. Right. So you're putting like and that was my whole thing with this epiphany is that if we're relying so much on compliance and teacher directed learning, that is the basis of school culture today.
Mhm.
How can you make it a stipulation of self-directed learning in order to get highly qualified status? Does that make sense?
It's
The
such
way that I
a
said that?
ridiculous
Like, yeah,
paradox
it's a trap.
that we're in. No, like,
That and that
I understand it completely, like,
yeah,
like, being in schools and trying to navigate that,
right.
and, like, in my classroom, I don't use like, our school has a lot of punitive measures that I just unsubscribe from,
Mhm,
and when I have people come into the room, like, I had my last, observation with our external consultant, told me I had 100% of my students engaged in class, 100%.
oh, yeah,
And I'm like, "There's reasons. Like, this is why
yeah,
this works," like, the proof is here.
right.
It's
Uh,
it's so interesting. I also had a little story too that I wanted to share that's
mhm,
very random, but just talks about, like,
yeah,
control in schools. When I was in 2nd grade, I was significantly ambidextrous, and I was also told to stop using my left hand for things. My ambidextrousness, which might not be a word, was stunted. I'm still like I can write with both hands. Like on the whiteboard, when I get tired, I switch and I use my left hand instead of my right hand. So my party tricks. I can also sing the alphabet
yeah.
backwards. But just another example of let us live our lives.
Right. Well, what was the point of that other than to, like, deafen your superpower?
I wonder if there was a shortage of left-hand scissors. I think about schools and I'm
Ding,
like,
ding,
it must have
ding.
come down to a budget thing.
It's always about money.
Oh, okay. Anyways, what's another quote? What's
Whatever.
another quote we got?
I've got so many. Okay, so,
I know this Google Doc is full.
okay. Yeah, well, we're at 15 minutes, so I'm not gonna go into my ending quotes, but, so let's talk about the hidden curriculum because that was a really good section. So, hidden curriculum is a idea by, I believe he's French philosopher, educational psychologist. I'm not 100% sure what he did in the world, but
That's such a
he
great
Henry
opening.
Guru.
Oh my
Thanks.
gosh.
Hold on, I found it. And this is perfect timing too, because I never find quotes in the book when I need them. And I just found it. Henry Guru. He is an educational philosopher. Isn't that what I
The
said?
words you said where I don't know what he
Yeah.
does in this world. Henry, we retract that.
Henri,
We know you're
probably.
making great contributions.
Oh,
Oh, this episode's
Henry,
great.
I'm sorry. Okay,
Keep
so
it going. Keep it
listen.
going.
Right. So he's an educational philosopher. And he asserts that resistance must be situated in a perspective that takes the notion of emancipation as its guiding interest. And that is a bunch of fancy words to say that we have to look at resistance as a way for students to get out of the circumstances that they're in. And there are like legitimate reasons for students to be resisting. One of those reasons is what he calls the hidden curriculum. So, the hidden curriculum is composed of unstated norms, values, and beliefs embedded in schools and transmitted to students. So they're the underlying rules that structure our routines and social relationships. Okay. So that's unstated norms, values, and beliefs. And when we know that 90%, 95%, I just made that percentage up. I don't know how many white teachers exist in education, but
The
it's a
number is really
majority of them.
high. Yeah.
The number is really high. So when we have a majority of the teachers being white, mid-income, able-bodied, hetero, like there are going to be norms that the majority that it's how like norms created from the top that do not jive with the student population's norms
Mhm.
because we have a huge difference in representation, right? Like
Yeah.
the teachers do not look like the students they're serving. So when resistance is created because there's this difference in what is considered normal and what is valued and what is believed, it's not going to work to punish that resistant behavior.
It's also not ethical, I would say.
Bingo. Yeah.
But it's something people are so unaware of. That's why it's called hidden.
Hidden. Yes.
Yeah.
That's why we're bringing it to you live on Instagram
Right. Another
in our
great book that
podcast.
talks about another great book too is These Kids Are Out of Control. And that goes over like crazy
Mm,
data points. And that's where you can find a lot of those numbers in there. I forget who that
mhm,
one's written by, but you can find it, These Kids Are Out of Control online. But no, it's so true.
mhm,
And so many things like I remember I was in college. I think I was in college. And I had this teacher who was talking about um I don't know if they were recounting a story, but it ended up being like this white teacher working with I forget which cultural group, but they said something like the teacher would like scratch their nose and then the kids would do something and the teacher like did not understand, but ended up being like a cultural symbol for them in like their own family culture that the teacher
Mhm.
had no idea about. But things like this
Mhm.
happen all the time. I'm thinking like eye contact.
Mhm.
That's a huge one. Or like the use of humor. Even like my husband told me when he came to the States, he's from Brazil, like he would address teachers by their first name because that was just the custom. And
Oh,
to hear
yeah.
that be so disrespectful, like, how
Mhm.
dare you call me by my first name? There's so much. There's so much. We teach so many different
Mhm.
cultures. But us
Right.
as teachers, like the majority percentage is a very
Mhm.
similar culture. We need this training. Just another plug for the
Mhm.
importance of culturally responsive education.
Yes. And that is a really good segue to get into respect, right? Because he
Yeah.
talks about uh, respect. And where is the section? Defining respect because it can be so, so subjective according to who's defining it, the context that it's in. Let me control F this document. Respect. Okay, so functions to teachers. Okay, so for example, teachers often establish the rule be respectful, which I really have kind of like a thing with.
Yeah.
I remember saying to my students like what is respectful, and they never really could define it. Like
Mhm.
no, but they do not understand.
It's really complex to word,
Right.
and so many actions that kids do, they don't have the intention to be
Right.
disrespectful, but it ends
Right.
up getting perceived that way. So,
Yes.
like, I cannot even tell you how many times I've had conversations with kids where I'm like, "Hey, I don't think this is your intention. I think maybe you wanted this or maybe you were trying to do that." And
Mhm.
they're like, "Yeah, that's what I was trying to do." I'm like, "Okay, but the tone came off disrespectful because your tone was
Mhm.
here and these are the words you used. So that's why this person did that." Like, you have to, like, put up together a play by play,
Right.
but it's also,
Well,
like, developmental.
it is, and it's
Mhm.
cultural.
Yeah.
So, um, the school that I worked at would give points, which is a whole episode in itself, would give
Yes, that would
points
be our
according
season
to
1.
right,
Episodes.
right. Yes, episodes. We have a whole season on it. Um, so the school that I previously worked at would give points according to safe, responsible, respectful behavior. And one, respectful behavior was not defined across the board. There was no stated expectation that's like displayed, even though there was supposed to be. But that each teacher had their own definition of respect. And some teachers would completely zero out kids for blurting. It's disrespectful. They're
Yeah,
blurting, but there is no intention of being disrespectful. What does
exactly.
disrespectful mean? That
And we
needs
all
to
have our
be
own
a
triggers.
discussion. Right, right.
Yeah. I remember thinking about that too, teaching, because, like, I am less triggered by a kid being in my face and telling me, like, "I effing hate you,"
Mhm.
than, like, laughter, like, when I'm trying to give a direction or something like that. And I'm
Yeah.
like, "That's interesting." I remember discovering that a few years back, and I'm like, "Why am I okay with one thing?" Not like okay, but, like, not super triggered by that, but, like,
Right.
this laughter almost feels like mocking. I'm like, "Why am I so upset about this?"
So, that probably goes back to childhood
Mhm.
because a lot of our triggers come from when we were children and what majorly influenced our brains and our stress response when we were kids.
Yeah.
So, um, I was just talking to one of my coaching clients about like or no, it was somebody in the neighborhood. So, talking about what triggers me. And you're right, like I could have a kid go it off in my face and I'm not triggered by it anymore.
Yeah.
But as soon as I hear an adult yell, I am
Mm.
triggered. And that's because my parents yelled all the time when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And there's a really, I think it's chapter 2 in the book Raising Better Humans, where it talks about noticing as a parent, like we have to recognize our triggers and we have to identify them. And I mean, it really just starts with noticing what triggers you. Because
Yeah.
once you notice it, you can engage with it in a different way other
Mhm.
than like sitting back and letting the trigger take you. Um, but back to I want to read this quote on respect. Okay.
Back
So,
to respect.
back to respect. So, for example, teachers often establish the rule be respectful in the classroom, ostensibly to prevent offensive behaviors and to promote uh, a regard for others' needs. On the surface, this traditional curriculum of respect seems like a perfectly reasonable, productive, and normal thing to do. We want people to be nice to each other. Case closed. But the command to be respectful can only be enforced successfully in those contexts where the definition of respect is agreed upon. I'm going to end it there because I think that is like a big takeaway. Like we have to agree upon respect. Like what is the definition of respect? Because
Yeah.
is it disrespectful if a student is being disciplined by a teacher and they don't give eye contact? Is it disrespectful if two friends are going back and forth dissing each other? Um, is it disrespectful if one friend disses another friend's basketball team? Like,
We
if
could
we're
extend
going,
this for forever, like
yeah,
leaving your school supplies on the floor underneath your desk.
yeah.
You
Is
know,
that
like
negligent or just
yeah,
disrespectful? Right,
there's so much for everything.
right.
Um, I was gonna say something too.
But I think it needs
Mm,
like that's a conversation that needs to happen if it's going to
yeah.
be like
Oh,
a pillar
definitely. And even
expectation, right?
I feel like it's not a good pillar expectation either
No.
because it's so vague. Um,
Yes.
yeah, like respect, I'm always like, ugh. I did a whole training on unpacking disrespect. And my 2-hour training in a nutshell was basically like respect is so vague. Like it's
Yes.
actually all these other things happening. Like
Right.
whenever whenever we talk to teachers about behavior, if they're like, "Oh,
Mhm.
my students are so disrespectful," we're like, "Okay, so it could be 2,000 things."
Yeah.
Like you have to do so much onion peeling back of all of the layers
Mhm.
to figure out what's actually going on. And that's also why I think one of the videos that we first connected on, Brittany, fun
Mhm.
fact, Brittany and I
Oh,
met
yeah.
finding each other's trolls in our Instagram comments a couple years,
It was
not like I guess
it
a
was
year ago now, right?
yeah, it was beautiful.
It was great. Yeah,
It was great. It's
I'm really
fate.
glad. Those are like back in the days. I'd like look through every single comment and try to like filter through, and then one person would comment, and I would lose it all.
Yes,
Before
yes.
the ManyChat software, now it's all on one
Yeah.
beautiful screen. And you can
Yeah.
get ManyChat today too. No, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Um,
Actually, well, really, you should share the story behind, like, the battle you had with well, not on this episode, but
that'd be
Ash
it.
had an epic battle with Many.
Oh yeah,
Now
I
they're
did have
gonna
an
come
epic
after
battle with
us.
them. Yes, but when Brittany and I met, I like kind of lucked into seeing your comments because I would lose them so quickly before the software, and I was like, "Oh, somebody's not trashing me! Wow, wonderful!" And so
Do you wanna
I
be
clicked on
friends?
yeah, I clicked on your profile, and like I saw that you had like responded to a few different people who were coming at me, and I was
Yeah.
like, "I love you
Come at me,
already."
bro.
And then I
Yeah.
followed you back, and then I saw you posted a video you get hate for a few days later, and I was like, "Let me fight someone for you, Brittany." And so I was in
Yeah.
your comments. But one of the videos that this first happened on was when I was talking about respect and about how I don't make my kids respect me because
Yeah.
that's a choice.
Right. You
You
can't.
know, like
You can't.
yeah, I can
You can
create an
try.
environment where like I try to cultivate respectable behaviors,
Mhm.
but like actual respect, that's a choice. And like I tell people, I can like talk to someone and be like, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. and then go behind their back and be like, what a jerk that person is. Like, they have no idea what they're
Mhm.
doing. Like, they have no idea what they're talking about. So am I being respectful? Like, I might be speaking
Right.
to them in a respectful tone. So I think it's important
Superficially.
to teach our kids like how to navigate those situations for their advantage. But I
Mhm.
also think, oh, I know that we can't enforce that. The choice for
Yeah.
a child to respect you can't create. They have to choose that
Yeah.
for themselves. That genuine
100%.
respect.
Yep. And I think this is a good segue into our action points.
Yes, I would agree. So, what is the action point that you have for the people tonight, Britt?
So I have a couple. When you're facing student resistance in the classroom, um, there are a few things that I always suggest, and that is discussions, co-developing your norms, boundaries, expectations with students, and doing that through discussions. And mm, I have more than 3. Now I'm trying to, like okay, so I'm gonna do these 2 definitely. Co-develop your class norms with your kids. That way they have a say, they have agency, and also you're going to learn a lot about your students and how they define respect. Because it's just as important, for you to understand their definition of respect as it is for them to understand your definition of respect. Then, um, have a lot of discussion with your kids. Have a lot of discussions. Host class discussions.
Yeah.
Um, and then 3, understand your triggers. I'll go with that one. Identify your
That's a
triggers.
good one.
Mhm.
I like that one. I think I have two. One of mine is like a personal one as well, where I would say to not take the resistance personally. And no, especially for us middle school teachers in the trenches out there, you know how it is. But don't take it personally. That's just a
Mhm.
natural thing that happens with our society and our age group and just where we are. And I used to take it personally for years and it sucked. So don't take it personal. And then, secondly, is everything is over control. So giving kids a voice, empowering them, collaborating with them, getting to really understand your students. Like all of this is primary and control is way all the way down there. You know, the second that you start thinking like I got to control this, that's the second that you got to regulate and be like, no, I don't. How am I going to lead this?
Mm. Mhm.
And I say we
Thank
end
you.
there.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
All right. So, bye everybody. We will see you next week, Thursday, 3:45
Ish.
ish.
This one was really late though. I had an appointment that came up, so we had to push it back a little bit. But 3:45 ish going forward.
And listen, so for all my people who listen to the podcast, this one is going to be uploaded tonight
Hmm.
because Ash and I have created a plan. We're gonna make
Yes.
sure that the podcast is uploaded tonight.
It will be live tonight. We will make sure of it.
Yeah. All right. I love you all, and I hope you have a fabulous